drove me crazy. And so I'm kind of looking forward to hearing what AI with the safety off is. This is Charles. You are the final speaker. So let's go out with a bang here. All right.
Perfect. Thanks, Brent. Everybody give it up for Brent and Sanchin, our earlier speakers. This talk is going to be a lot less technical than those other ones, but there will be a lot more clip art and drop shadow. Just to briefly introduce myself, I'm Charles. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Novo, trinovo.com. We help plaintiffs' attorneys draft demand letters and medical chronologies. As badly as I like to shill our company for 20 minutes to you all, this talk is about a little bit about what we've learned over the last year building the company, and a little bit about sort of the future of the legal space, and this phrase AI safety, which I feel like I've been hearing more and more of. I've been very interested in what that sort of means. It has all these sort of different meanings. It means kind of everything and nothing. And I wanted to at least look at it through a certain lens and kind of the way we've experienced it over the last year. So who here has heard of AI safety or heard people talk about AI safety before? What does AI safety mean? Not going off the rails? Skynet? Limiting bias? The internal process is not disrupting something or other. That's exactly what I was thinking. It means all these different things: job displacement, autonomous weapons, missiles, bias, existential risk. And I was always kind of interested in, there's the sort of stated cause of, or the stated meaning of something, and then there's the revealed meaning of something. And I kind of want to talk about this idea just kind of through the story of our company. So we started the company about a year ago. The problem that we were really intently focused on is the fact that litigation really favors the well-funded. Now, I'm not an attorney. I just play one on TV. And anybody who's hired a lawyer before knows that it's very expensive. And this is sort of one of the more hyped categories for something that AI can disrupt. And so, my co-founder and I said, we have some technical expertise. We want to actually attack this problem. And we built the very first version, or I'll say just some background. And I didn't know this until after we started the business. But for one, the billable hour did not really become popular until the 50s and 60s. I mean, for most of the history of the country and sort of the West, attorneys have been billing on flat fee, meaning there's sort of, you pay them for the job, however much time it takes to sort of get the job done. And the billable hour exploded in the 50s and 60s, and it's only gotten more expensive over time. And if you think about technology as doing more with less, and if you think about the fact that you have to pay more and more for the same thing, you can kind of think of the legal system in the United States as anti-technology. And so this is a part of this is a part of the West that is really sort of ripe for disruption, and this is a big, big problem. And so the very first version of our product, we hacked together basically a llama clone that got really good at answering legal questions and writing legal briefs. And so these are the only two screenshots I have left from this very, very early version of the product. But this was sort of the first prototype we had spun up, where it would basically help you draft briefs and motions, and it was pretty good at citing case law. It obviously had some of the issues that all LLMs have with hallucinations, and we had a couple of hacked together solutions for that. And we were targeting defense litigators. Now, who here has seen the show Suits? Right? For those not that familiar with the law in the room, defense litigators are kind of like the people in Suits. These are large firms. These are some of the really high-paying jobs that every law student kind of wants to go work at. The top 50, so the AmLaw 50 firms control about half of all legal spend in the United States. So it's very concentrated at the top. They're the most sort of prestigious category of attorneys. And we had several calls with several of these companies in the AmLaw 200 and kind of showed them the tech that we had put together. And they said this is really interesting. They were very curious. They were sort of like cats, like they were, very, very interested and engaged, but definitely very skittish. And we found it was really hard to get traction because they said, well, we have concerns about the safety of AI and the usability of AI. And but this word kind of safety kept coming up, and I'd heard safety mean all these different things, and in this context, it meant, well, we're not sure what the implications of using AI are for us. And uh, as we started to have these calls, something that we realized was kind of getting beat around the bush, and one firm even said it, is, they bill by the hour. And so if you're giving me a labor saving device and I can save 10 hours, that's 10 hours I'm not billing my client. Only one person said that explicitly. Everybody else was kind of, beating around the bush, which is a huge perverse incentive that, they're not looking for technology. They're not looking to bill less hours. And, some of them, if they would bill you, they'd bill you $1,000 an hour to dig a ditch and fill it back up again if you'd let them. And so this version of the product was not super successful in the first couple months. And so we started to talk to other different types of attorneys, and we were good founders. We went out with no assumptions, and we sort of, talked to family law and patent attorneys, and we sort of figured out who has the biggest kind of hair on fire problem for wanting to draft with AI. And it was plaintiffs' attorneys. And this is sort of a different category of attorney altogether. This is a much less prestigious type of law. They're very often stereotyped in movies and film. But there is a big difference. They only get paid when they win, which means they bill on contingency. So although they sort of have a whole different set of incentives where they were really, really excited. They said, we don't care if it's broken. We don't care if it's not quite working yet. We don't care if it just helps us save a little bit of time. They were really, really excited to use what we had built. And so we actually pivoted who we were focusing on, pivoted what we were building toward plaintiffs' attorneys. And so the current version of Novo that we have is helping plaintiffs' attorneys draft a demand letter or a medical chronology in a couple minutes. And you can think about this as we help them with pre-litigation. So before they step in the courtroom, when they sort of first try to help somebody recoup some losses from damages, whether it be a car accident or a medical malpractice or police brutality or something like that, we sort of help them get through that process a lot faster, and we save them a lot of time and money doing it. And so this was really interesting to us. We figured out that this is going to be the adoption curve for attorneys. So the ones who work on contingency plaintiffs firms are going to adopt this first because they have unbounded costs for any legal writing they're doing up front, and then flat fee defense later. Again, they just don't have the same incentive to adopt the technology, and then sort of government probably at the end. And if this pattern progresses, we realized this is what is going to happen, or something like this is going to happen as the AI starts getting adopted by attorneys. First of all, it's going to become cheaper to initiate a lawsuit before it becomes cheaper to defend a lawsuit. Again, who's going to adopt this first? Who's going to be the first user? It's going to be the people working on contingency, and those are the attorneys who are initiating lawsuits. Defendants are going to demand more for their dollar, and they're going to turn to firms that don't bill hourly. If you imagine it becomes 10x cheaper to initiate a lawsuit or issue a demand letter, then that means insurance companies are going to have to deal with more lawsuits, and they are not going to continue with this pattern of the billable hour going up and up over time and outpacing inflation. And so law firms that use AI and don't bill hourly are going to outcompete those that don't. And the end state is that that's how legal representation is going to become cheaper for everyone. And so one side adopting it and one side resisting is going to result in this asymmetry that eventually translates to everybody using the technology. I'll sort of give another analogy. So this is General Joseph Joffre was the commander-in-chief of the French military in World War I. He was very old school. He was a big fan of the frontal assault and a big fan of the cavalry. And he was already sort of old, but by the time World War I started. And it turns out frontal assault is not a great strategy when machine guns become a normal part of warfare. And so in the Battle of Frontiers, very early in World War I in 1914, it was a complete bloodbath for the French. They were frontal assaulting into German machine gun fire, and you can really you can be the most decorated. You can sort of be the protected incumbent, but if you ignore the technology, it's not going to look good for you. And so the kind of the thesis of what I had taken away from what we had kind of encountered is that the status quo sort of serves the incumbent. And again, about 50% of all legal work in the US goes to just 50 law firms. And these firms are totally content for things to stay the way they are. They don't want no change. They would love to keep billing these hours and the price of the billable hour to continue going up. But technology actually serves the underdog. And so just kind of a more broad commentary on what's going on with the LLM providers is that these are some of the largest advocates for AI safety. Google wrote this paper about their recommendations for regulating AI, and it involves setting up, sort of government, essentially, and having government agencies decide which technologies are, acceptable uses of AI and which are not. Google is a huge advocate of, AI that poses high risk should be required to disclose general information about their existence and nature to those who have legitimate interests. Who has a legitimate interest? Certainly Google does. And it's not that different from the fact that, bankers write the banking regulation and the health insurance companies write the health insurance regulation. And so you can kind of think of, I think OpenAI and Google are great companies. And ChatGPT is something that we use in our agency pipeline. But when these people say safety, often what they mean is they want stasis. They want the status quo, not that different from the attorneys we were sort of trying to pitch to start adopting AI. And I guess one other note on this, less a question of left and right, but more that ChatGPT has put a lot of concerted effort into making sure their answers are what they would call safe. And their sort of revealed definition of safe is just the establishment. And again, not a question of left or right. It is neither polite to the anti-establishment left or the anti-establishment right. It is sort of their definition of safety is things staying exactly as they are, and the people who sort of are the incumbents remaining the incumbents. And so I think we should keep AI for the little guy. Last, shameless self-promotion, we're hiring a senior full stack engineer and a senior front end engineer. Just email me if you want to get in touch. Questions? Oh, go ahead, please. So medical chronology. So imagine you pull out of here and you get into a car accident on your way home, and you live, thank God. But you have a horrible accident and you have a bunch of injuries, and you were not at fault. Well, anybody who knows, if you even go to just go to CVS and you get a prescription for something, you come back with 20 pages of medical records, and God forbid you go to the hospital, you come back with 200 pages of medical records. And one thing an attorney has to do is they have to take all your medical records from your injury and literally turn it into like a 1 or 2 page Excel spreadsheet. It's a horribly painful, awful process. I spent a lot of time on the r/paralegal subreddit, and every post is, does everybody else hate their life too? Because they're reading through other people's medical records to turn it into a spreadsheet. And it's a very expensive, painful, horrible process. And this is one of the things that AI is perfect for. So we take those medical records and with AI kind of boil them down to a spreadsheet, and then send it back to the user for them to verify and make sure all the information is correct. And it makes a very painful, tedious process really easy. Which model we're using for that? We have an agency pipeline that integrates a couple of different agents. So not that different from the previous talk. We have several different agents doing several different things. some of the outputs become inputs for other agents. And so, like I mentioned, ChatGPT is just one of them. Claude is one of them. We actually use others too. We've done a lot of A/B testing and figured out, different ones are good for different things, if that makes sense. Do we use Perplexity? I use Perplexity, not as an agent in our pipeline, but I do. I use it probably more than Google, actually. Yeah, so a big part of our offering is not only generating something useful for our users, but having a sort of guided verify step. I think there's there's often a lot of emphasis on the AI replacing humans or AI just not being good enough at some task at all. And I think a lot of the value of AI is when you have the AI plus the human. And so being able to generate something and then kind of give like a guided reading to the user of like, hey, here's the answer, here's how we got there, correct any errors, then sort of hit the final step. So that's a Sorry, could you repeat the question one more time? So if to repeat the question, at what point will this sort of become a threat to the powers that be, where we would maybe get slapped on the wrist like a do not pay or something like that? I think that would be a great problem to have, because that means we're helping a lot of attorneys, and I hope to get there. But that is to say, I think there are some examples like nuclear where the regulators have totally won and totally shut it down. And that's obviously very good for oil and gas. But for the most part, the technology wins. For the most part, the technology wins. Yeah, that's right. I mean, it makes sense. I don't blame Sam Altman for basically wanting to, control the conversation about AI regulation. But when they say safety, they mean something very different than I think their revealed intention is very different than their stated intention.
Is that charge by hour? Oh, thank you. That charge by hour that are loath to or reticent to incorporate these kinds of technologies. Are they swayed by the argument that it's better, that they can get better results than their humans? And then maybe to that end, have you been able to do any quantification of what results Novo gives versus the high-paid paralegal that would have done a similar job, and compare the two of those?
We did some of that, some of our live demos where we would ask a complicated legal question. We sat with a tax team actually of a very large AmLaw 200 and had them all in a conference room. And we literally had them take stabs at what we had built, and it did a pretty good job. And we kind of got an assessment. Hey, how long do you think that would take you to find out? And we learned a couple things. I mean, for one, written output was more valuable to somebody than just the answer. Like research wasn't that useful as much as like a piece of writing was. And then they were very intrigued. But anytime you want to make a change like this in a big company, there are a lot of people who have to bless it, having done sort of enterprise sales at another company in a previous life. And there's sort of all these reasons for them to say no, especially if business is good, they're billing a lot of hours. And a lot of you can look up on YouTube, there are presentations for law students about literally how to write up your hours and how to rack up more hours and how to make sure, and hey, you call them one more time, hey, we got to file this brief for a final appeal, it's going to be another this, but we really got to do it. There is sort of this distance of incentives that I think just when the idea of AI comes up, they go, let's wait. They hesitate instead of acting. Long-winded answer, but
yeah, to some of that point, one of the big problems that has been seen in the legal space is the hallucination issue. And
that's right.
There was a lawyer who was basically, I guess, sanctioned because he had a fake brief because of ChatGPT. So I guess my question is about You know, how big of an issue is that? And is, you know, have you been looking at different solutions? And do you need to get fine tuning? Like I think the company Harvey uses fine tune like models, or are there other, you know, the other methods? You know, what do you see as kind of the grounding issue and how you're tackling it basically?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. Well, I'll say for one, you know, our sort of first version, you know, very early was kind of an alpha product for motion and brief writing. And since we moved to plaintiffs, their biggest ask was, can you do medical chronologies and demand letters? Which basically we originally started on litigation. We started working on pre-litigation. So maybe that's a little too inside baseball for this talk. But when we were working on briefs and motions, hallucinations were a huge problem. And it was really about what's the best workaround. And there were sort of a couple ideas we had thought very deeply about. There's one where basically an attorney is responsible for actually bringing in any law they want to cite. And it's just that the AI is going to actually draft it for them. Another is you have sort of a validator agent that checks for hallucinations. That's a lot easier said than done. And these were like some of the ideas we were thinking about as we started to shift to plaintiffs and pre-litigation became really our niche. And we sort of kind of put what we had built for litigation on the shelf. And, you know, so it's for me, just kind of speculative, but it's not the problem we decided that we were going to put our stake in the ground on. Pardon me? Do we have an architecture that we can share? A user will upload some documents based on their case, and then we, you know, have several agents. You know, one agent puts it in a blender, one agent puts it in the oven, one agent, you know, and nothing I can share here. Nothing I have any documentation to share, but there's several different agents that produce sort of different results, and then we have other agents compile them, and then some do some like spot checking. And that's kind of where the majority of the technical work has been on the actual application itself.
Hi. So I guess the main point you were making there about AI safety is that it's being weaponized now by the larger players against the smaller players, more or less. So what would you say then in terms of how AI safety should be approached then? Is it something that it should be more grassroots developed then, in terms of how it's being propagated?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I definitely wouldn't say that AI safety is an unimportant topic, but it's more an observation that some of the loudest voices in the room actually sort of serve an ulterior motive, and that was just sort of an observation that I had, and then I saw a parallel in sort of my own industry. But I think any new technology is very, very messy, and there's sort of, you know, humans, we're sort of more remiss to lose $10 than we are to make $10. We're very focused on the loss. And I think, you know, the risk of regulating this thing and it going the way of nuclear actually serves to do a lot more harm than good. And so we should be encouraging people to play with it in their basement and break things, and slightly less safety, I think, is probably preferable to slightly more.
Did I just hear you want us all to have nuclear reactors in our basements? We need to talk.
So, Zinke is if we want to stop the big tech company from using user data to train the AI models, should it be a technical solution or should it be a legal solution to prevent those companies?
That's a great question. I'll go a bit off the cuff here. I think that any large tech company is doing a pretty basic cost benefit analysis at this point. They accumulate a data set. They say, we're not going to use this data for X. We're not going to sell it. We're not going to use it to train a model. The value of that data set grows from, you know, 1 million to 100 million to 1 billion to 100 billion. And then at some point, violating that promise that they made with their users, might be, you know, a 1/100th of a fine that it would take to actually capture that value. An anecdote, you know, if everybody remembers when Mark Zuckerberg was first testifying at Facebook for their data privacy violations, you know, the verdict came, Facebook owed $1 billion to the federal government for the infringement, and the stock went up like 50% the next day. It was like, oh, just $1 billion, that's it? Cool. And in hindsight, they were kind of vindicated for actually choosing to do that. So I don't think that's not a I actually like Mark Zuckerberg. I don't think that's not a condemnation of Mark Zuckerberg, but you know, the incentives of the system of them are to just build this data set, and then at some point it will cost them some small amount of money to violate that promise. And so I'm under the assumption all of them are taking all of my data. And you know, if there is going to be a solution, it must be technical, because the legislators are paid off by the tech companies. I think the solution is in the technology, not in the legal. To answer your question, but that's a good question.
Hey, Charles, over here, last question.
I doubt you're going to want to answer this question, but I saw a headline, I didn't read it, that they want to change OpenAI to a for-profit company, and when it started as a nonprofit.
Yeah, that happened. Is there a question? Do I approve or disapprove? And I wish OpenAI the best of luck. Truly, yeah.
But I mean, it seems to go against the using the data to build the models. You build it when you're nonprofit, so everybody's willing, and then you flip it and say we're for profit now.
Yeah, it's a good legal question. OpenAI definitely incurred some major costs by having the nonprofit status and structure, and like them having the sort of 72-hour coup with Sam Altman seemed to like be a part of that. So I think they'd probably say, actually, when we were building this thing, the nonprofit status was this huge shackle. And, you know, I guess Elon's trying to argue that if they could do it, any company could do it. But I think they would say it was actually a huge shackle, and we wouldn't have done it again. We probably just found it as a for-profit or something like that. But this is pure speculation. This is not my area of expertise, but.
Yeah, I think we'll shut down the large format questions. I just, you know, move on with the night. Thank you, Charles.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it was a great talk. I totally appreciate it. You can tell that, you know, we covered tonight, you know, 3 pretty different topics, but there was kind of some common threads that kind of went through them as well, which was pretty solid, right? We're all kind of working on the same problems or same problem.